For the past few weeks, I've been testing out the MPC One, which Akai was kind enough to send over temporarily so I can make a few videos with. Today, I want to compare it to the groove boxes that I do own, the MPC Live II, the Akai Force, and the Maschine Plus. I had a thesis, which is turning out, I believe, to be true, which is that the MPC One is the best beginner, budget, and value device on the market. There are even ways in which it's better than some of the more expensive devices. Today I want to show you some of the differences in the feature sets of all these devices, how they compare to each other, and which one makes sense in which scenario. So let's start with the Akai Force. I bought the Akai Force because I wanted to be able to take my Ableton projects and play them live. That is not what I ended up using the Akai Force for. Over the time that I've had it, it has been updated. It now has access to the MPC instrument collection, which it didn't have the last time I made one of these comparison videos. And due to how similar the workflow is to Ableton, in many ways it is my favorite standalone hardware music making device. In comparison to the other devices, it has a few pros and a few cons. It easily has the best I/O in my opinion when it comes to plugging in XLR mics or guitars. It has phantom power, which I don't believe any of these other devices have, although I most of the time use this Shure Beta 58A, which is a dynamic mic, so I don't really need the phantom power. It's awesome to have it. It has the same amp simulator the MPCs have. It has the same vocal suite the MPCs have, but it has the Ableton style grid-based workflow, which gives it some pretty big advantages, and it has disk streaming. Recently, it also gained the ability to open MPC projects, which I'm going to make a whole different video about down the line, but that could be the nail in the coffin for people who felt like they needed to own both. That said, there are some disadvantages. It's definitely the biggest device, so space is an issue that could be a problem. It doesn't have a battery, which the MPC Live II does, and we'll talk about that in a bit. It doesn't have a speaker, which the MPC Live II also has. However, similar to the MPC Live II, it has an SD card slot and a bay for a SATA drive, either an SSD or an HDD. Unlike the other devices, it also has an AB crossfader, which I don't know how to use yet, but I really want to learn because that's part of why I wanted to get it. Combined with the disk streaming, which you can do off of an SD card or an internal drive, it really is just a beast of a machine. Now, the prices of these devices has varied wildly over the last year. When I bought this, I bought it on Reverb for about $850, and then I found out the SATA bay didn't work, and the seller was kind enough to give me $150 back, which it felt like a fair trade. So I paid about $700 for this. That has turned out to be a really fantastic deal. Honestly, given the features they've added, I do feel like this is worth list price. However, I do think that when people buy these devices new at the new higher prices, it would be cool if Akai included the instrument collection or at least a very substantial discount for those additional plugins, because those plugins really do change how much you can do with these things and the sounds they can produce without having to sample. So really, there aren't a ton of cons for the Akai Force at this point. It's kind of the do-it-all device, and I think other devices are now playing catch-up to it. Again, it just doesn't have a battery and it doesn't have a speaker, but neither do two of the other devices here. So let's talk about the MPC Live II. The MPC Live II is a beast as well, specifically for people who just want to make beats and want to make sequences. Oh, because another pro I forgot to list for the Force is that it has an arranger mode. Similar to the Maschine Plus, but dissimilar to the MPCs right now. It is a full linear track creation method similar to like a track recorder or most linear DAWs. Unlike the clip-based workflow of most of these devices, both the Maschine Plus and the Akai Force have the ability to record into a linear arranger mode. I personally have not done this too much with the Force. I tend to export my stems and do things like that in Ableton, but it's there, which is another thing that makes this kind of the best all-in-one studio in a box. And given its size, it kind of makes sense it would be that. That said, if I ever do get to the point of performing, it is also my top contender for a live performance device currently. That's mostly due to the disk streaming, the audio tracks, the plugins, and the vocal suite on board. Back to the MPC Live II. Why would you want an MPC Live II versus a Force? Maybe you prefer the MPC workflow, you prefer larger pads, you want a speaker, you want a battery. Historically, it seemed like the MPC has been getting the advanced features first, although I definitely have seen times where the Force had features that the MPC didn't have. So that's hard to write as a definitive rule. I wouldn't really buy any of these devices for what you think they might do in the future. Kind of a universal truth, but it's worth reiterating. Buy a piece of gear for what it does today, not what you think it's going to do tomorrow. Why did I buy an MPC Live II? If you've watched my channel for a while, you might know that I had some pretty serious issues with the Maschine Plus. When the Maschine Plus first came out, it had a lot of bugs, and I paid $1,400 out of my own pocket. As I said, I bought all these devices except for the MPC One, which is on loan. And I was pretty angry at the Maschine Plus because I had such high hopes for it based on the marketing, and it really didn't meet those initially. In that frustration, I decided to get an MPC Live II. I've had a lot of fun with the MPC Live II. I think it is a great device. It is the best device for just taking with you around the house, showing your friends or roommates or loved ones the beats and things you're making, potentially collaborating with other people. I've seen commenters post it's a really good device for taking to a studio where you don't have to worry about wall power and things like that. However, I make all my stuff in this room. I don't really go anywhere. I don't really take it anywhere. And so the battery has proven to be way less of a pro for me personally than I thought it would be. But from a pure spec sheet comparison, the battery and the speaker are the biggest differentiators for the Live II. It has a few more buttons than the Live I, and the Live I did not have a speaker. Okay, let's talk about the MPC One. The MPC One is the cheapest device here by far, especially on the used market. It has more buttons per function than the MPC Live II. In general, and this is just aesthetic opinions, these are going to differ person to person, but I find it to be the second most beautiful of these devices, especially this retro colorway is really taken my heart. I really love it. If you're a modular person, the Live II and the MPC One have a bunch of CV outputs and inputs and stuff like that. I don't use CV at all, so I cannot speak to that, but it's there. The MPC One is missing some things that the MPC Live has, which include an internal SATA bay, doesn't have a speaker, doesn't have a battery. Outside of that, I believe it has the same CPU and RAM as the Live II. It has an SD card slot, so external storage is not a problem. The headphone jack on the MPC Live II is a 1/4 inch, which requires an adapter for most headphones. The headphone jack on the MPC One is an 1/8 inch jack, which means that 1, it's front facing, which is really nice, and 2, you can plug in most headphones just directly into it and not have to worry about an adapter, which is also really cool. It's like the exact opposite of the modern iPads. It is the exact right interface for a musician. Speaking of I/O, these devices have similar inputs and outputs. There are more outputs on the Live and more USB ports. Unlike the Force, neither of these have an XLR input, which I think all of these devices should have an XLR input in my opinion. The dual jack style of the Force is so cool, and I want it on every groovebox, modern groovebox. I prefer the button layout and the design of the MPC One to the MPC Live II. The pads are bigger on the Live II, but I really don't mind the size of the pads on the MPC One. That said, I do find the MPC pads to just in general be less fun and accurate for me compared to both the Akai Force and the Maschine Plus. And lastly, but definitely not least, is the Maschine Plus itself. The Maschine Plus hasn't been in a lot of videos on my channel lately, but it is probably my favorite groovebox. At least it's the one that I've used the most to make songs that will actually be on my albums. For the MPCs, there's this weird thing where a lot of the MPC tracks I make end up just being these, floating sketches. They make me a better musician, they make great videos, but they don't always sound exactly how I want them to be on an album. That is changing with the MPC instrument collection. I have found that there are now way more sounds that sound really good that I will probably use on future albums, but in the past, I did find the sound quality difference of the internal plugins to be a pretty big gulf, which is why for the last year or more than a year, the Maschine Plus has been the device that will end up on my next album a lot more than the MPC and the Force. But like I said, with the instrument collection out now and having access to those plugins, which Akai was kind enough to send me, thank you Akai, that is changing that dynamic. And now it really does come down to what sort of sounds you're looking for and how can you augment them. With the MPC instrument collection, which again is available on the Force and the MPCs, you have access to studio strings, a piano, electric piano, and a few different organic sounds that the Maschine Plus does not have, at least outside of expansions, and those expansion instruments are just one-shots usually. Sometimes they're multi-sampled, but it's not quite as in-depth, and it's not a controllable plugin the way it is on the MPCs and the Force. Speaking of those plugins, although some of them are less powerful, all of the plugins on the Akai devices are designed to be tweaked and allow you to create your own presets and do a lot of sound design on the device itself. As you very likely know, the Maschine was originally designed as a hybrid device to be plugged into a computer. They assumed you would have a computer screen at all times, so a lot of parameters for different synths and plugins and other features are expected to be on the screen, and that reduces some of the sound design capabilities of the Maschine Plus. In my initial time with the Maschine Plus, that was not a huge con, but as these other devices have leveled up in that regard, it is clearly a missing feature on the Maschine Plus. As I noted, the Maschine Plus has an arranger mode, which is really cool, and I have used it. It has a feature called clips, which lets you record additional data into the linear arranger. I've used that for songs that will be on my album. I find the Maschine Plus to be the most aesthetically attractive device of all of these. It's also the most ergonomically designed device with its wedge shape and general central focus. Similar to the MPC One, both of these devices feel really designed with a person using them sitting in front of them in mind, whereas the Force is very large and tends to really benefit from being on a stand because of how it's angled and how long it is. And the Live is interesting because if you're focused on the pads, then the screen's over here. And especially if you have a MIDI controller to the side, it just starts to feel really spread out in a weird way, in my opinion. But really, I will say it's kind of hard to go wrong right now. There are legitimate, compelling reasons to get all of these devices. But that said, here are a few closing thoughts. If you want a clip-based Ableton-style device with a full studio feature set and you don't need a battery or a speaker, at least built in, the Akai Force is the way to go. I use this thing all the time. I think it will appear on future albums and future projects for sure, and it is very likely to be the brain of my live setup in the future. The MPC Live II is probably the weakest link here, and that's just because I don't care about the battery or the speaker very much. The battery and the speaker are great. They are well done. It's a good device. It's a solid device, and if you can get it for a really good price, and the difference between the One and the Live II is only $100 or $200, then it kind of comes down to what you want. But I like the form factor of the MPC One so much, and the design, and the buttons per function, and the clickiness of the buttons, as some of my commenters have noted, that I would honestly lean towards the One versus the Live II. And as I noted earlier, because there is the ability to import MPC projects into the Force, there is an argument for just having a Force versus any of these. But the Force is way more expensive. So if you were just starting out, an MPC One seems like the best bet. If you already have Native Instruments plugins, or if you love the Maschine workflow and you want a standalone machine, Maschine Plus is really good. The stability is way better than it used to be. I use it all the time. I've not really encountered major bugs. It has an autosave feature now, so if it does crash, it's very easy to recover your project, which again, I haven't seen happen too much, but when it has happened, it's been way better having that feature. I didn't talk about this too much, but the pads on the Maschine Plus are my favorite. They're really nice for melody and for drums. I love the expansions on this thing. I love the internal synthesizer sounds on this. I do want more sound design capabilities. I think it's way overdue for a graphic user interface overhaul for things like Massive and FM8 and Prism and a few other devices on here that would be way better for sound design on board if they were designed with the controller first. Like I said, it was designed to have a computer screen, and I do think that holds it back a little bit. I would also like to see XLR inputs on here, similar to the Akai Force. I don't care about a battery, but I do think it also could have benefited from more RAM and more CPU and just more power. This is not a problem these devices have because these devices were designed to be standalone from the very beginning of their inception. The plugins on board and all of that were designed for standalone. The Maschine is a controller and a device that is putting in what was traditionally a computer experience into an all-in-one. Given that that's the history, it is extremely impressive what it can do, but it also creates a very high bar of expectations because you think it's going to be able to do everything the Maschine can do when plugged into a computer, and it can't. I still get comments of people asking, oh, can I use this plugin or the Play series and all this stuff? And I have to be like, no. When you see me doing that, it's because I'm using it in controller mode. Another feature this has that I really like is it works with the S series, A series, and M series of keyboards from Native Instruments, which gives you additional parameter control, similar to these knobs, but it's nice to have multiple interfaces for the different feature sets of this device. I've also seen Loopop use additional MIDI controllers with the Maschine Plus and use it for live performance, and I really recommend Loopop's video on using the Maschine Plus as a live performance device. I found it very compelling. Anyway, I hope this overview is helpful. From a final thoughts perspective, it's pretty hard to go wrong. Really, I highly recommend just looking at all the features of these things and figuring out what is the most useful for you. Do you want an Ableton style workflow and standalone? Do you want the Native Instruments Maschine style workflow? Do you want the classic MPC lineage and history? Do you want to save a bunch of money? Or do you want a battery and a speaker? Do you need an internal SATA bay? Assuming it works, which my used one didn't. It does speak to the power of buying new. I've had hit or miss experiences buying used. Luckily, the sellers have all been pretty cool, but there's a lot to be said for buying new. If you're interested in buying any of this gear, I have affiliate links below. Using them doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does support the channel. Liking and subscribing is another great way. And lastly, thank you so much to my Patreon patrons and to the fans of my music on Spotify and all streaming services. Please check out the links below in my description for affiliate links, like I said, and check out my music if you're interested. All right, have a wonderful week ahead. I'll see you soon, and Happy New Year.